We welcome everybody to the next door thought. This current video will be breaking down the different kind of systems that have been running the governments of the world. We'll be doing it will slightly be a longer video because we'll be trying to give a background of the first video which we did, because the first video that we did, we were addressing the two government system, the one which is currently taking place, which is a capitalist system where we have a few people controlling the whole affairs of the nation or the country, and the second one which it's inevitable that it will come in, which is socialism, where the means of production is in the hands of the people. But before we could go there, we'll want to give it a background in terms of the historical context and make people understand that where do we come from and where were we as a people in the world. Now, we understand that the system that prevailed before the current systems that we are having, we had a system which I classified it I classify it as a fascist fascist system. Now, this fascist system that we had was controlled by monarchy. Now, when we say monarchy, we talk about kings and queens. Now, in this system, we had slavery. Slavery, it was human beings who was were used as a form of commodity to add value in a value chain of the rulers of that time, which was the monarchy, of course. Now, in a fascist government, it's where we saw the development of a relationship between the monarch, the nobles, and the bishops or the clergy, which later on it developed into a certain other system. But in a fascist system, it's the most barbaric form of the system. Now, the fascism is barbarism at its highest. It's where the human development stage has not yet taken place. Now, in fascism, it's where we have slaves, which is human beings being used as a form of commodity, in a form of human beings being used like horses, cows, or dogs and cats. They do not have a human status. They are a commodity. They are more like an animal in a sense. Now, we developed from a fascist state into a state which was known as a feudal state. Now, feudalism is a more developed fascist system, because fascism is still dominant in a feudal system. The only difference is it was able to hide. It was no longer barbaric and bare as it was during the period of slave, in a sense. But even though in feudalism you have the monarch owning the nation as its own personal property, yet under the consensus of a board, and this board consisted of having nobles, or they were called lords, having lords and not only having lords but also having clergymen. Sometimes we'd say bishops, having bishops. Now this too will constitute as sort of a regulating kind of a system, yet they are all beholden to the monarch, which it is fascist and still barbaric as it was in the first. The only difference is it's now hidden behind the lords and the clergy or the bishops. Now the lords and the bishops are doing the monarch's state work on their behalf. Now we still have slaves, but their status as slaves is upgraded. We can say up one notch. They're not really that much upgraded, but they're still upgraded. But there's still barbarism that is being practiced, in a sense that you'll find that one part of the nation could be under the control or under the custodianship of the Lord. And now the people who would be occupying that space or that land, uh, who will be living under this feudal system, meaning they will be paying their due relevance of existing to the Lord. Everything that they will want to do, they will have to get permission from the Lord, and on behalf of the Lord will be giving a report to the board where the fascist government sits, which is the monarch, as the head. Now, what is so sick about this system is that I'll just give one example, that you'll find that there was a practice, that was practiced by the lords to assert their rulership upon their subject. And it was in the sense that you'll find that if you lived in a land which was owned by this lord, who was a custodian for this fascist monarch government, and you wanted to marry a woman within the borders or within that land, the lord who was the head of that land would have to have sex with your wife first before you as a man you could have sex with your wife, and that sex would be after you marry that woman. In simple terms, it was simply exhuming and showing the barbarism that existed in those times. Now, the barbarism that existed in the feudal times is as much the same as the barbarism that existed in the time of the fascist monarchs that were ruling over the slaves. The only problem is it had a little bit of a desensitizing effect, because the bishops would be there, the clergy, let me just say, the clergy are the church people. They will be there to desensitize the slaves from the harm that they were experiencing within the feudal system. And every time the serfs would want to rise, they will not be able to rise because they will be desensitized and put in a cap of illusion by these bishops, who paid homage to the fascist monarch and had a patronage system that was running between them and the lords, and they had favors within themselves. Now, this system collapsed as the serf raised up against this system, and when the system collapsed, now we went into what we call a revolution period. And the highest mark of that revolution, we can say, the French Revolution. Now, the French Revolution replaces the fascist monarch. The French Revolution is, we're gonna use it as our context of reference in terms of the rulership of monarch in the world. The French Revolution removes the monarch. Here we're talking about our the Jacobin boys, the redhead boys who fought against uh, the monarchs and the lords and the clergy who are beholden to the lords and the monarch and the fascist monarch. And the French Revolution came about, and it was sealed by the beheading of the French king Louis XVI and his wife. Now, when the revolution came into fruition, we had now a system which we call capitalism. Capitalism came in, where we find that the lords, the clergy, and the fascist monarch on top, it's replaced by what we call petty bourgeoisies. Now, the petty bourgeoisies are supported by the people, let's just say subjects, because during the state of monarch, fascist monarch, they were subject because they were subject to someone. They were not citizens, they were subject. So the people, the subjects here, are subjugated by the petty bourgeoisies, and they are in hope that the petty bourgeoisies will bring about a revolution where it will empower all people. But like most revolutions throughout history, we go back as far as the times of the Babylonian revolutions, the Egyptian revolutions. Most revolution, when they take place, they have a promise of empowering everyone, but at the end, they only empowered a few. At this point, they empowered the petty bourgeoisies, and the petty bourgeoisies betrayed the people. Of course, it came with some freedoms. The freedoms was that the petty bourgeoisies created an open market now, where people can be able to be involved in being merchants, be involved in the market of the country. The market of the country was no longer in the hands of the lords or the fascist monarch. The market came now to the people, it came down to the people. But the problem is the petty bourgeoisie, because they came up with this revolution and they funded it. Of course, we must not forget that the petty bourgeoisie came up with this revolution, but they were helped by the clergy, by the bishops. The bishop betrayed the fascist monarch. That's part of history which is not recorded, but we'll not get into that. Now, the petty bourgeoisies betray the people. As they betray the people, they create a system of monopoly. That's now the second stage of capitalism, where we get into monopoly of corporations. Now, the petty bourgeoisies become the fascist, because fascism is a form of barbarism where a few dictate to the majority without the majority having any say or power, unless there's a revolution and they rise up. Without the revolution, they can never have any power. Now, the monopoly, which is a corporation, it's a unity of bourgeoisies, which we classify as the ruling class. Now, the ruling class create a status of no longer people being subject, but people being citizens. It creates a status of citizenship, and it gives people what we say are human rights. Now, human rights, they come in at a time of capitalism and monopoly. They did not exist during the time of slave or during the time of feudalism. Humans were treated as commodities, as animals. But during the time of capitalism, it comes with a little bit of benefits, and this benefits blinds the people's eye because they see human rights, they see that they are citizens, but yet they are not controlling the market of their country, meaning that which belongs to them, the means of production, is not in their hands, is in the hands of the fascist petty bourgeoisies who have created a monopoly of cooperation that dictates to the people how the market of that nation is going to run. Now, therefore, they make themselves as if they're a monarch. So, fascism still continues under capitalism. And that's where we are today. That's why we say they are a cabal. They were supposed to liberate people from fascism, from slavery, from feudalism, so that they can empower people, for people to be a government of the people by the people. But they betrayed that. All the charters that were written up during this time, all the promises that were made up during the revolution, that the people shall govern, all of that was betrayed. The serfs who came from among the people saw themselves as now being better than the people. And in this illusion, or in being delusion, they sold out the agenda of liberating the people fully. And therefore, they maintained the original structure of feudalism, yet it had more checks and balances. And the checks that it had now, it was no longer the lords and the bishops, but now it had what we call the government. Now the government became the check and balances. It became the ruling board of the citizens, not subjects anymore, but citizens, meaning those who guard the human rights of these citizens. Now, this government, we said it had three legs, which became the executive, the legislature, and also the judiciary. Now, the judiciary, legislature, and the executive was made up by people or citizens that came from the bottom. We'll say this is the 90%, the people that came from the bottom, who through the system which is created by monopoly were able to come up the ladder. Now, to come up the ladder, they created the government, and in creating the government had to have institutions, and one of the institutions that will make people to come up the ladder, it will be education. But remember, this education is not to liberate. This education is to create people who will be able to assimilate within the government that the petty bourgeoisie have created, which is a fascist government that runs their own affairs. Not only runs, but looks after their own affairs as they do business. Because they came with the revolution, they are continuing to do business on behalf of the people. So this school becomes a ladder for this 90%, for them to climb up, and they find employment in the legislature. Now the legislature will break down these three parts of government quickly for you: legislature, the judiciary, and the executive. Now let's break it down quickly. The three legs of the government. This is the government. This video would be a bit longer, so please do bear with us. The executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. Now the executive is it's where you find the apex of the government. It's where the president is. The executive is the executor of the laws that the fascist petty bourgeoisies have given to the government. Remember, the petty bourgeoisies, they own the means of production through their monopoly. So they we call it today that they lobby for certain policies. But in a simple, frank term, is they dictate what kind of law they want for them to continue doing their business, because they own the market and therefore they own the nation. And those who are here under this institution that is created by petty bourgeoisies have nothing to say but to just run the system that is created by the petty bourgeoisies in this capitalist system. So the executive is where you find the president, his cabinet, which is the ministers and all and that. And then when we come to the legislature is where you find the members of parliament. The legislature is where the law of the land is created, the law of the land is made. It's parliament, that's legislature. That's where you'll find the members of parliament. You'll find also opposition parties who are not fighting to take over the fascist petty bourgeoisies, but they're just fighting to take over the executive so that they can lead the executive. In the legislature is where you'll find the different parties. For example, in South Africa, it's where you'll find EFF, you'll find DA, you'll find they are all fighting to impress the petty bourgeoisies that they can run the government, which is the affairs of the petty bourgeoisies, more fruitfully, so that the 90% citizens can be lullabied nicely without them suffering too much hunger, because they can deliver a more sufficient system if they are in government. So in the legislature is where they make laws, but it's also where they debate on how they can govern better. Now in the judiciary is where we have the judges. Is where we have our judges, the judiciary, where we have our magistrate, where we have our prosecutors, where we have our law. These ones are the keepers of the law that governs the executive, and the law that also governs the legislature, because already there's laws that will also govern the legislature, even though legislature has power to change those laws, but they are there to govern the legislature. So these ones are the keepers of those laws. The magistrates, the judges, they are the keepers of that law. So currently we are at this system, which is the fascist petty bourgeoisies who have created monopolies of corporation. Now, monopoly of corporations today are what we may say to you. Let's just look into South Africa and not in the world, even though the monopolies are connected internationally, because these people are historical families, and therefore it is cousins of cousins. They know each other. While they all serves, we can prove that. We can't go that far that they were all serfs, but some of them we know that they were part of royalty. And when they saw that the monarch system failed, they masqueraded themselves as serfs so that they can continue the fascist. And probably maybe that's why the serfs maybe didn't really betray the people, but it was the monarch who now masqueraded as the serfs to perpetuate the fascist system that was governing the people in a more sufficient manner, that had mechanisms such as government, such as executive, legislature, judiciary, and the school to filter out those whom they might deem not too bright to become part of running the system. Now, of course, out of the government, there's a few who might make it into becoming the petty bourgeoisies. And That's where corruption comes in, because you'll find those who are members of the executive and legislature, they are stealing the money. And whose money are they stealing? It's the 90% people's money that they're stealing. Even though some may argue that it's the petty bourgeoisie's money, it's not the petty bourgeoisie's money. The petty bourgeoisie's money is made up from the citizens. So therefore the money belongs to the citizens, because the means of production which is incorporated in the land belongs to the people. But because the people are belonging in a system which runs similar to that of monarchy, therefore whatever is in that land belongs to the petty bourgeoisies by far. Because the people do not understand the system. But if they do, they can uprise. And that's when we talk about the revolution. Remember, the petty bourgeoisies also belonged to a system where the monarch controlled the land and they didn't have power into the market. But because of a revolution, we refer to the French Revolution, there was an uprising so that they can be part of the market, they can be part of controlling the means of production of the nation. They are able to take over. So the only way to change a government is not by vote. Let them not lie to us. A vote is only about entertaining the structure that the petty bourgeoisies have already created. A revolution removes everything. Everything. We're talking about when the French Revolution came in, everything was removed and everything had to be started from the bottom. Now, obviously, there can never be a revolution if there's never been a proper plenary. So, therefore, we need a proper plenary in order for a revolution to be executed, because we are not fools to be led into an unplanned revolution, because therefore we'll be leading ourselves into death and that would be committing suicide. With that being said, we have broken down the government. Remember, we said it's the executive. That's where you find the apex, the president and his cabinet. And we said the legislature. That's where you will find the members of parliament and the different political parties who are fighting, which is a battle of ideas for them to enter and become the leading executive on behalf of the petty bourgeoisies, which is capital, which is a corporation, big corporation, the monopoly. And then we have the keepers of the law, the judiciary, which is the judges, the lawyers, the magistrates, and the prosecutors as well. Now, in our next video, we'll go into breaking down the system that needs to come after this capitalist system. Remember, the capitalist system went into two phases. It was capitalism at its primitive stage, and then we have capitalism at its advanced stage. But these two stages never solved the initial problem, which was truly liberating the people so that people can partake in the market of their nation, so that people can truly benefit from the means of production, and not only benefit but be the owners of the means of production, because at the end the means of production belongs to the people. Now, what is the means of production? The means of production is whatever is found within the border of a certain nation to trade, so that that nation can develop. It falls in the category of the means of production. Therefore, if we're talking about mines, we're talking about factories, we're talking about, we did refer to it that we talk about, the three sectors of the economy, which is the primary, the secondary, and the tertiary sector. That's the means of production. We're talking about our sea. If we have a sea where there will be fishing that is taking place, that's also producing as well as part of the market, part of the sectors. But if that is not in the hands of the citizens, then the citizens have no say. They become slaves, even though the illusion is given to them that they are citizens, but they are still subjects because they do not own the means of production. And the illusion is maintained by the government because these ones, they become the fat cats and they steal money, and they, some of them within this government, they run businesses so that they can be incorporated and be part of the petty bourgeoisies. Do they make it? Let's see in our next video whether do they make it or not. Thank you.